if you don't have emotional truth, your characters don't feel real, and your story's not going to resonate with readers. The emotions in a story have to come from somewhere.
You know, what it felt like for me in middle school to see my friends kind of go off in one direction and not feel like I really fit in with them, and try and search for people that I did fit in with, but to feel like I was in this sort of middle ground, and what was it like in there? And so when you find a kind of, when your story takes you to a point where your characters kind of go through that's where you want to sit for a little bit and investigate what are they going through at that moment. And I remember that. I remember that emotional moment. So that tends to be why I write middle grade, why my stories are all right around there, because I feel like those are the kind of emotional spikes that I remember. What it was like to not feel like I belonged, to feel like I belonged to a certain group, when I finally felt like I found people who got me, but kind of the journey that I went through and all the little different things that happened. Yeah, the emotional truths are what's important. When I was 10 years old, they started aging up Robin, and well, they were aging him up all along, but they started sending him to college and everything. And yet when he'd go out and fight crime, he was still stuck wearing those little green jockey shorts. And you know, even as a 10-year-old, I was like, that cannot be comfortable for anyone. Criminals, he's doing all these high kicks, and it's like, I mean, seriously. So that kind of stuck with me. And then when my editor was looking for a new book, I kind of pitched this superhero story about these sidekicks. And as I was writing the first scene, I knew what I wanted to have happen. I wanted to investigate a sidekick who started out when he was 8, and now he's 15, 14, somewhere in that range, and his mentor is making him wear the same costume that he wore when he was 8. And so he's wearing these bright leotards, and he's in a situation where he saves a beautiful woman falling off a building, and she goes into shock and starts breathing heavily on his neck, and a typical pubescent reaction happens, and he's trying to stop. He's like, think baseball, think sharks, because he's like, she's gonna think I'm a pervert, I don't want to, but he ends up having this reaction, and that's when the news chopper comes up and films him and broadcasts him across the city. And so as I was writing that, I always thought that was pretty funny. He's gotten me in trouble and banned from a few schools.
So I have two very different experiences. The second book, which was actually the first book I wrote, I actually wrote it as my thesis at Emerson. I sent it around a bunch of agents and I got it rejected. It didn't fit nicely into categories very well. I then sent it around to larger publishers and got it rejected, and smaller publishers, and got it rejected. And so I gave up on it, and I worked on the second thing. And the second novel, with the novel Two Parties, had a completely different experience because I got connected to an agent who only wrote one agent who took it. She sold it in 4 days. So, and then another year and a half later, the first book had been sitting, at this point, well, it's more than that, because it's been 4 years since I'd given up on the first book. I got a call from press saying, is this still available? And I had to say in an embarrassing way, oh, I was working on other things, I wasn't really pushed, but yeah, it's still there. And so one took 4 years to come out, and one took 4 days. So I guess an average of 2 years? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm a mom, and I have a 4-year-old and a 9-month-old, so anything that's like, and I teach full-time, so, I don't have, people are like, oh, I get up and I have coffee and this and that. Like, I don't sleep at night, and my days are never the same, so so I've had to kind of learn to write when I have time and when I can. So there are some things that I have to do to kind of prepare myself for that. I have a notebook that I keep for each specific project that I'm working on, and that's where I do, I write obviously in longhand, and I do all my brainstorming in there, and sometimes I'll write out scenes, or I'll do lists, or calendars, or bubble diagrams, whatever it is, whenever I have, a chance, if something comes to me, I'm always able to grab for my notebook. So then when I have a chance to sit down, usually my husband is also a writer. Works in the advertising industry, and so he's home a lot. I'll be able to like duck out for a couple of hours and go to a coffee shop, and I'll have like 2.5 hours before I have to get home and do bedtime, or 2.5 hours after bedtime before I have to go to bed. And then I'll just go and I'll just wail on the laptop.
I tried to write without an outline because I read Stephen King's book on writing when I was trying to figure out how to write a book, and he's like, no outlines, and I was like, yeah, no outlines, and I failed miserably. And so it's like, I write without lines. I'm sorry, Stephen King.
The one thing I do as a piece of discipline, I use Scrivener too, but I love Scrivener, but my standard thing is I do this thing called 750 words, which I actually use. It's intended to be sort of free writing. You just log on every day and you do your words, and it gives you little X's at the top of the screen that show how many days in a row you've done it, and you get little badges if you get a certain number. It's really nice, and the badges actually help because you're not willing to say, I'm not willing to be reset to an egg if I'm already at an albatross. And
I'm sort of a paradox because I write paranormal YA, and that's what I plan on continuing to write, but I find I don't really enjoy reading it very much. I gravitate towards contemporary fiction, and that's something I discovered during grad school, and I was trying to figure out why that was while I was working on the first book, and I felt like with a lot of paranormal, the world building takes precedence, and characters sometimes fall behind that. So when I started Wildfire, I really wanted a book where you could theoretically remove the paranormal elements and still have this great character story going on, but the main character just happens to spontaneously combust once in a while.
And I just started writing. I started with one vampire, and the world just grew, and I don't think there was so much of a conscious thought of I should include this as, well, this one doesn't make any sense. According to the history that I've developed for this world, this particular association with vampires just doesn't make sense. Or this one is kind of cool, I'll have to figure out a way to explain it. So a lot of it, even though I'm writing about things that, according to most at least, including myself, don't exist, I like being able to justify them. I like being able to give them a background.
When I first started writing Carrier of the Mark, I wanted it specifically to be written about the area that I was living in, which was a small town, Kinsale, in Ireland, and I needed something different and a paranormal element that I could link into that particular area, and so I wanted to make it very tangible and real. So I did a bit of research on different mythologies and came up with this particular one that I thought really worked, especially with the architecture and the historical sites in the area. And that was the story of the goddess Danu. And there are loads of Celtic sites, mountains and areas of natural beauty that are all linked back to Danu. And she was basically Mother Nature, and she controlled these elements. So that's where I decided to take a slightly different paranormal and create my own kind of creatures based on the Celtic, so I could work in my Irish setting. So.
Became the Iron Codex. Like, I really wanted to write a steampunk book because I think steampunk is awesome and fun, and I love it, and I love alternate history and all that stuff. I'm a humongous history nerd, so I really wanted to write something in that vein, and the Lovecraftian stuff came because I'm a big fan of Lovecraft, and I've always wanted to take a run at his kind of open source world and address some of the more problematic stuff about him and the stories that he wrote in the time that he wrote them. And I really, I think he would probably be super horrified that his stuff ended up in, like, you know, a YA, like, you know, female-led feminist take on the whole, like, fairy legend with steampunk elephants. So that part was a little bit on purpose.
But in terms of teen, I think that especially young women, but I like to think young men too, they need stories that are more than just about getting a boyfriend and a girlfriend. And I think they're able to understand stories that are more than just about getting a boyfriend or a girlfriend. And I think that's what separates the books that I like in the genre, including mine, from the ones that I kind of look at and I just, you know, okay, it's cool, people are reading, that's awesome. But I like the books that send kids a message like, you can do more.
I was definitely influenced by Lovecraft in writing the Iron Codex books. I wouldn't say I'm his biggest fan or cheerleader. Like I said, I acknowledge that in spite of me loving his stories, there's a ton of problematic stuff in them, and in the way that he lived and the stuff he said. I am probably, honestly, most influenced by Stephen King. I just love telling a good story that freaks you right the heck out.
I would not be writing without R.L. Stine, honestly. I still have, you know, I can't even, I don't even want to open the books anymore, because I'm sure it's one of those things where if I open them now, I'm going to be like, but I still have 200 of his books. I have an entire bookshelf devoted to it, and I blame him for why my eyesight is horrible, because when I was like 8, I would just drag my blankets down the stairs, set up in front of the TV, turn off all the lights, and just use the light of the TV to read Goosebumps at like 1 or 2 in the morning.
My editor she's really, really sweet. She's never mean. And she has this way of saying things that where, you know, it's basically saying you have to get rid of this chapter, get rid of this, and what, but it's all done really nice, and she's really lovely, and you come out thinking, oh, and there's smiley faces all over my manuscript. And when you see the smiley faces, it's okay. This means the more smiley faces you see, the more work you got to do. Because